swing, bada.
Welcome to the fourth installment of what we're calling Lessons for Baseball Cards. This will also serve as our daily devotional for April 30th, 2020 for the Graymere Church of Christ. Of course, again, this is an opportunity for me to use a baseball player or a baseball card as a way to provide you with an illustration for several lessons that we can also see in Scripture. Today, the illustration for our lesson is actually a 1983 Topps Tony Gwynn rookie card. Tony Gwynn, of course, one of the smartest hitters ever to play baseball, Mr. Padre, who played all 20 seasons of his career for the San Diego Padres. I want to tell you a little bit about the early life of Tony Gwynn. Tony Gwynn grew up as a two-sport athlete. He excelled in high school as both a basketball player and also as a baseball player, though most of his lower body injuries later in his baseball career would be attributed either to his weight or to the wear and tear that his body took as a basketball player for all of those years. But he was unique in that at an early age, Tony Gwynn recognized what his strength was. He recognized early on that he was not going to be a home run hitter, but that his strength was in getting hits, making contact with the ball. And he spoke of how as a kid, the newspaper would come and he would be looking each day at the box scores, not to see who hit the most home runs, but he'd be looking to see who got the most hits. So that became the focus of his baseball career. When he finished high school, believe it or not, he actually had 0 baseball offers to play baseball in college, but he had several scholarship offers to play basketball and ended up choosing to attend San Diego State University only because the basketball coach agreed to allow him to pursue baseball as well. However, he had to agree that he would only play basketball for the first 2 years of college. But as it worked out, his first opportunity to play baseball in college actually came in his sophomore season. The basketball coach had been fired and 2 baseball players had been injured. So he received this opportunity to go ahead and give it a shot and to be a replacement on the baseball team. And of course, once again, he excelled as both a basketball player and as a baseball player, and actually ended up being drafted into both the NBA as well as to the San Diego Padres in Major League Baseball. Let's shift gears now and talk a little bit about the career of Tony Gwynn. Of course, Tony Gwynn, he had excellent vision. He was focused on seeing the ball and making solid contact with it. He was probably the best there was in baseball at identifying the pitch the minute it had left the pitcher's hand and then making solid contact with the ball. He was also a very patient hitter. He didn't walk very much, but he also did not strike out very much. He was a great opposite field hitter. He even worked hard and became a really good outfielder as well. But what really stands out about Tony Gwynn were his amazing study habits. In his first season in 1983, he actually went out and purchased a video camera, and he had his wife, she would come to all of the games, and he had her to videotape all of his at-bats so that when the game was over, he would immediately go home and he would start analyzing, examining every frame of his at-bats. Of course, this is something that he was doing long before it became common in Major League Baseball. He was going home and working on it. He was looking to see what his errors were, what he could correct. So then he'd come into practice, to batting practice the next day, and he would be making adjustments so that he could do even better in the next game. Another part of his study habits was that he was really good at note-taking. He had extensive notebooks where he would make notes on the pitchers that he faced, the pitches that they threw to him in different situations. He would even go so far as to make notes on opposing hitters so that he could become a better outfielder. So just incredible study habits. And the results, obviously, it really paid off for him because he was one of the most consistent hitters ever to play baseball. He was an 8-time batting title champion. I believe he never batted less than .309 in a season, which is incredible. Over 3,000 hits for his career, a 15-time All-Star, a 5-time Gold Glover, and of course, a first ballot Hall of Famer. Let's now talk about a couple of lesson starters from the 1983 Topps Tony Gwynn rookie card. The first lesson starter I want to give to you is that of self-realization. Of course, I noted that Tony Gwynn recognized early on what he was good at, what he was not good at, and decided he was going to focus on what he was good at. So I believe also that Scripture teaches that we should be people who recognize who we are not, recognize what we should do as well as what we should not. Notice with me what Romans 12 and verse 3 says. For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. So certainly this is a biblical point in recognizing who we are, not trying to be something that we're not. Notice also what Paul says in Galatians 6 and verse 3. For if anyone thinks he is something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. So the lesson there is that we shouldn't deceive ourselves trying to be something that we're not. We should be people who focus on fulfilling our potential rather than trying to be something that we're not. But now let's notice a second lesson starter this morning together, and that's self-examination. I noted the amazing study habits that Tony Gwynn had in videotaping his at-bats and studying them, analyzing them, making corrections the next day in batting practice. Well, I believe it's true also that Christians ought to be people with good study habits. And as we compare ourselves or analyze ourselves, our actions, our attitudes through the pages of Scripture, we ought to be people who can then make corrections, make adjustments in order to behave better and treat others better as well. Let's notice what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 13 and verse 5. Examine yourselves to see whether you are in the faith. Test yourselves. Or do you not realize this about yourselves, that Jesus Christ is in you, unless indeed you fail to meet the test? Notice also what is said in James chapter 1, verses 23 through 25. Of course, this is that text about being hearers of the word, not doers, and looking at ourselves, looking at Scripture as if it's a mirror that shows us our true self. Notice what it says. For if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man who looks intently at his natural face in a mirror. For he looks at himself and goes away and at once forgets what he was like. But the one who looks into the perfect law of liberty and perseveres, being no hearer who forgets, but a doer who acts, he will be blessed in his doing. So the lesson there in this self-examination is that we ought to be people who can examine ourselves through the pages of Scripture. We ought to be people who can make the necessary corrections and the necessary adjustments in our actions and in our attitudes so as to better glorify God and so as to better treat our fellow man. So there we have a couple of lesson starters this morning from the 1983 Topps Tony Gwynn rookie card.